I found the document while looking for Dad's insurance card in his desk drawer. At first, I thought it was just another medical form, the kind that piles up when someone's been in and out of hospitals as much as Dad had been. But then I saw the words "Do not resuscitate" printed in bold letters across the top, and my hand started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the paper. My name is Emma, and I'm 23 years old. 3 months ago, I moved back home to help take care of my father after his second heart attack. Mom had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier, and Dad had never really recovered from losing her. Not emotionally, and apparently not financially either. The DNR order was dated just 5 days ago. Dad's signature sat at the bottom, along with Dr. Patterson's witness signature. I stared at that scrawled handwriting, my father's shaky, uncertain loops, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Emma, you okay in there?" Dad's voice drifted from the living room, and I quickly shoved the paper back in the drawer. My mind was racing. Why would he sign this without telling me? We'd talked about everything since Mom died. At least, I thought we had. I walked into the living room, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, I need to ask you something." He was sitting in his recliner, the same spot where he spent most of his days now. At 61, he looked closer to 75. The heart attacks had aged him, carved deep lines into his face that hadn't been there before Mom's diagnosis. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" I sat down on the couch across from him. "I found a DNR order in your desk. When were you planning to tell me about it?" The color drained from his face. For a moment he just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Then he looked away. "It's just a precaution," he finally said. "A precaution?" My voice rose despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Dad, this means if your heart stops, they won't try to save you." "I know what it means, Emma." His tone was sharper than I'd heard in months. Then he softened, his shoulders sagging. "Sit down. Please. Let me explain." I realized I'd stood up without meaning to. I sat back down slowly, my heart pounding. Dad rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture I recognized from every difficult conversation we'd had since I was a child. When he looked at me again, his eyes were wet. "Do you know how much your mother's cancer treatment cost?" The question caught me off guard. I know it was expensive. $247,000, Emma. Even with insurance, we were responsible for $90,000 of it. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We sold the house we were going to retire in. We cashed out half my 401k. We borrowed against my life insurance policy. And it still wasn't enough. I'd known things were bad financially, but I hadn't known the exact numbers. The weight of them settled over me like a physical thing. When she died, I thought at least the bills would stop. But they don't stop, sweetheart. They multiply. The funeral cost $18,000 to put someone in the ground. And then my heart decided it wanted to quit on me too. Dad, the first heart attack? $32,000 after insurance. The second one? $41,000. I'm drowning, Emma. We're drowning. And I won't, leave you with the same burden your mother left me with." The silence that followed felt suffocating. I wanted to argue, to tell him that money didn't matter, that his life was worth more than any debt. But I could see in his eyes that he'd already made up his mind. "There's something else," he said quietly, and the way he said it made my stomach drop. I waited, barely breathing. "I canceled my health insurance. The premiums were eating through what little savings we have left. As of yesterday, I'm uninsured." The room seemed to tilt. "You did what?" "I calculated it all out. If I can stay healthy for just 8 more months, I'll qualify for Medicare. 8 months, Emma. I can make it 8 months. And if I can't?" He gestured vaguely toward his desk. "Well, that's what the DNR is for. One way or another, this ends without burying you in debt." I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. The logic was there, cold, practical, devastating, but it felt like my father had just handed me his death sentence and asked me to accept it. "Please don't look at me like that," he whispered. "I'm doing this for you." But the truth was already becoming horrifyingly clear. My father hadn't just signed a DNR order. He'd made a calculated decision about the exact dollar amount his life was worth, and then he'd decided it wasn't worth enough. I had no idea that in 72 hours, that decision would destroy everything we had left. And the first domino wouldn't even fall at home. "Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations." Now, back to the story. The call came at 2:47 a.m. I'd been having a nightmare about finding my father dead in his recliner, so when my phone started buzzing on the nightstand, I jolted awake with my heart already racing. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with our area code. Hello. Is this Emma Rodriguez? Daughter of Thomas Rodriguez. The voice was female, professional, urgent. Yes, that's me. What's happened? This is Grace Community Hospital. Your father was brought in by ambulance approximately 20 minutes ago. You're listed as his emergency contact. We need you to come to the emergency department immediately. The world seemed to narrow to a single point. What happened? Is he okay? I can't discuss details over the phone. Please come as quickly as safely possible. She hung up before I could ask anything else. I drove to the hospital in a daze, barely remembering to put on real pants instead of pajamas, my mind conjuring every worst-case scenario it could manufacture. Dad had been fine when I'd checked on him before bed. He'd been watching a documentary about World War II, his color good, his breathing normal. What had changed in 6 hours? The emergency room was a fluorescent nightmare of white walls and antiseptic smell. I rushed to the reception desk, gave them my father's name, and was immediately directed to a small consultation room instead of being taken to see him. That's when I knew it was bad. Dr. Patterson was waiting for me, the same doctor who'd witnessed Dad's DNR signature. She was a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes that had seen too much death. Emma, please sit down. Where's my father? What happened? Please sit. Her voice was gentle but firm. I sat. My legs were shaking too much to stand anyway. Your father collapsed at a 24-hour grocery store around 2:15 a.m. A store employee called 911, and paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. Based on witness statements and preliminary examination, we believe he experienced cardiac arrest. The words seemed to come from very far away. You believe? You mean you don't know? Dr. Patterson's expression shifted slightly, and I recognized the look. It was the same one she'd had when she'd told Dad his second heart attack had damaged 40% of his heart tissue. The paramedics initiated CPR immediately and used an AED to restore his heart rhythm. He was unconscious when they brought him in, but his heart was beating. Okay. I grabbed onto that word like a lifeline. Okay, so he's alive. Can I see him? Emma, there's a complication. She paused, choosing her words carefully. When the paramedics accessed your father's medical information through our system, they discovered his DNR order. However, because it wasn't on file with the ambulance service and they'd already begun resuscitation efforts, they continued treatment and transported him here. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. What does that mean? It means we have a significant legal and ethical situation. Your father explicitly stated he did not want resuscitation efforts. The paramedics, acting in good faith, but without immediate knowledge of his wishes, performed those interventions anyway. But he's alive. That's good, isn't it? Dr. Patterson leaned forward slightly. Emma, I need you to understand something. When someone's heart stops and CPR is performed, every second without oxygen causes brain damage. The paramedics did an excellent job, but there was a gap. We won't know the extent of potential neurological damage until he wakes up. If he wakes up, the room felt too small suddenly. What are you saying? I'm saying that right now your father is in an induced coma. We've stabilized his heart rhythm, but his brain activity is concerning. We're running tests, but it's too early to know if there will be lasting effects. He might wake up completely fine. He might wake up with significant cognitive impairment. Or he might not wake up at all. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. This wasn't supposed to happen. Dad had signed that DNR specifically to avoid this. The uncertainty, the prolonged suffering, the medical bills that would stack up while he existed in some terrible limbo between life and death. There's one more thing, Dr. Patterson said quietly, and I actually laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. One more thing? What else could there possibly be? When we ran your father's insurance information, we discovered his policy was canceled. He's uninsured. Emma, every hour your father stays in this ICU costs approximately $3,000. Every test, every medication, every scan, it's all out of pocket. And if he requires long-term care. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. The exact situation Dad had been trying to prevent was now unfolding in real time. How much? I heard myself ask. How much has it cost already? Including the ambulance, emergency intervention, and current ICU admission? Just over $17,000. And that number will climb significantly if we need to perform additional cardiac procedures or if complications arise. $17,000 in 3 hours. The math was brutal and immediate. If Dad stayed in the ICU for a week, we'd be looking at $500,000. If he needed surgery, rehabilitation, long-term care. I need to see him, I said, my voice hollow. Dr. Patterson nodded and stood. Follow me. As we walked through the sterile hallways, she continued talking, but her words seemed to blur together. Something about consent forms, about financial counselors, about decisions that would need to be made soon. I wasn't really listening. I was too busy trying to understand how my father's careful, calculated plan to save money had spectacularly backfired in the worst possible way. We stopped outside a room in the ICU. Through the glass window, I could see my father's still form surrounded by machines. Tubes and wires connected him to life in a grotesque mockery of the very thing he'd tried to avoid. Before you go in, Emma, I need to be very clear about something. Dr. Patterson's voice was grave. The DNR order is still legally valid. If your father's heart stops again while he's here, we are legally obligated not to resuscitate him. Do you understand? I nodded, though understanding and accepting were two different things. But there's a problem with that, she continued, and something in her tone made me look at her sharply. A problem that's going to become a very big issue very soon. What problem? Dr. Patterson met my eyes, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. His heart is failing again, and we have somewhere between 6 and 12 hours before it stops completely. The machines beeped steadily through the glass, counting down the seconds to a decision I wasn't prepared to make. But the real nightmare hadn't even started yet. I spent the first hour sitting beside Dad's bed, holding his hand and watching the monitors. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, assisted by the ventilator. And 4 drip-fed medications into his arm, medications whose names I couldn't pronounce and whose costs I didn't want to know. The cardiac monitor showed his heart rhythm, irregular and weak, each beep a reminder that time was running out. He looked peaceful. That was the worst part. He looked like he was simply sleeping, like at any moment he might open his eyes and complain about the uncomfortable hospital bed. But the longer I sat there, the more I understood that the man in this bed might not be the father I knew anymore. At 4:15 a.m., a nurse came in to check his vitals. Her name tag read Patricia, and she had the efficient warmth of someone who'd learned to care while maintaining emotional distance. How is he? I asked, though I knew she probably couldn't tell me much. Patricia glanced at the monitors, and I saw something flicker across her face. His blood pressure is dropping. Dr. Patterson is reviewing his labs now. She'll be in to talk to you soon. Soon turned out to be 20 minutes later. Dr. Patterson brought another doctor with her this time. A cardiologist named Dr. Yen who looked like he hadn't slept in days. That was my first indication that whatever they were about to tell me was serious. Emma, we need to discuss your father's options. Dr. Patterson gestured to the chairs near the window, away from Dad's bed. The physical distance felt intentional, like they didn't want him to hear this conversation, even though he was unconscious. We sat, and Dr. Yen pulled out a tablet, showing me what looked like a scan of my father's heart. He pointed to various areas as he spoke. Your father's heart has sustained significant damage. The cardiac arrest caused additional trauma to already compromised tissue. Right now, his heart is operating at approximately 15% capacity. The medications are helping, but they're a temporary solution. What's the permanent solution? I asked, though part of me already knew. He needs a surgical intervention. Specifically, we need to install a left ventricular assist device, an LVAD. It's essentially a mechanical pump that will help his heart circulate blood until he can potentially receive a transplant. A heart transplant? The words felt surreal. It's a possibility, though not a guarantee. He'd need to meet certain criteria, and could be on a waiting list for years. But without the LVAD, Emma, he won't survive the week. His heart is going to stop. It's not a question of if, but when. Dr. Patterson took over. The surgery to install the LVAD has a 78% success rate in patients your father's age. There are risks, infections, stroke, organ failure, but statistically his chances are good. The bigger concern is what comes after. What comes after? Recovery will take months. He'll need round-the-clock monitoring for the first few weeks, then regular follow-up care, medication management, and eventually physical therapy to rebuild his strength. He'll be tethered to external batteries for the device, which means his mobility will be limited. His quality of life will be significantly different than before. Dr. Yen leaned forward, his expression serious. And then there's the cost. The surgery itself will run approximately $250,000. Post-operative care for the first month could be another $100,000. Ongoing care, medications, and monitoring for the first year will easily exceed another $200,000. If complications arise, those numbers increase dramatically. The air left my lungs. $550,000 minimum. For 1 year. For my father to live attached to a machine, his life reduced to battery changes and medication schedules. What's the alternative? I heard myself ask. The doctors exchanged a look. We honor his DNR, Dr. Patterson said quietly. We keep him comfortable with palliative care. When his heart stops, we let him go peacefully. Based on his current condition, that would likely happen within 24 to 48 hours. The choice laid itself out before me with brutal clarity. I could spend money we didn't have to save my father's life, trapping both of us in a medical nightmare that would likely bankrupt us. Or I could let him die the way he'd wanted, knowing I'd have to live with that decision forever. I need to think, I said. You have 6 hours, Dr. Yen said. Maybe less. His heart is deteriorating rapidly. If we're going to do the surgery, we need to prep him soon. After a certain point, he'll be too unstable to operate on, and the decision will be made for us. They left me alone with Dad, and an impossible choice. I pulled my chair closer to his bed and studied his face. The lines had deepened even in sleep, carved by pain and loss and financial stress. He'd spent the last 2 years watching medical bills pile up, watching his savings disappear, watching everything he and Mom had built together crumble under the weight of American healthcare costs. And he'd made his choice. He'd chosen to protect me from that same fate. But sitting there, looking at him, I realized something that made my chest ache. I'd choose him over money every single time. I'd live in a cardboard box if it meant my father got to live. I'd declare bankruptcy, work 3 jobs, sacrifice everything. The problem was he wouldn't want that. He'd wake up attached to that machine and realize I'd spent money we didn't have, and it would kill him just as surely as his failing heart. At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Jennifer from the hospital's financial services office. We need to discuss payment arrangements before any surgical procedures can be authorized. Please call me at your earliest convenience. The reality of it hit me like ice water. They wouldn't even operate without some guarantee of payment. I'd have to sign forms, put the house up as collateral, maybe take out loans at predatory interest rates. I'd have to legally bind myself to debt that would follow me for decades. I pulled up my bank account on my phone. Checking account, $3,247. Savings account, $8,905. Dad's accounts had maybe another $12,000 combined. Everything else had been spent keeping us afloat after Mom died and through Dad's heart attacks. $24,000 against a $550,000 medical crisis. I was still staring at my phone when Dr. Patterson came back in at 6:45 a.m. Emma, we need your decision soon. His blood pressure is... She stopped. I'd started crying, and I hadn't even realized it. I don't know what to do, I whispered. I don't know how to choose between my father's life and his wishes. I don't know how to condemn him to the exact situation he was trying to avoid. I don't know how to live with myself if I let him die. I don't know. Dr. Patterson sat down beside me. She didn't touch me, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just sat there, a quiet presence while I fell apart. Finally she spoke. Emma, you asked earlier about alternatives. There is one option we haven't discussed yet. But I need to warn you, it's complicated, potentially risky, and ethically gray. I looked up at her, wiping my eyes. What option? There's a program. A clinical trial. It's experimental, which means insurance doesn't cover it, but it's also free for participants. They're testing a new type of temporary cardiac support device, similar to an LVAD but less invasive and potentially more effective. Your father might qualify. Something that felt dangerously like hope flickered in my chest. What's the catch? Several catches, she said grimly. First, acceptance isn't guaranteed. They're very selective about candidates. Second, because it's experimental, the long-term effects are unknown. Third, the trial is being run by a pharmaceutical company with, let's say, a controversial reputation. And fourth, if he's accepted, he'd need to be transferred to their facility in another state. You wouldn't be able to be with him during the initial phases. What company? Dr. Patterson hesitated, then said, Corvus Biomedical. You might have heard of them in the news recently. There was a lawsuit involving one of their cancer drugs. I had heard of them. The lawsuit had been all over the news 6 months ago. Allegations of falsified trial data, of prioritizing profit over patient safety. It had settled out of court, and Corvus had denied any wrongdoing. They're trying to rebuild their reputation, Dr. Patterson continued. This cardiac trial is part of that effort. They need success stories, which means they'll pull out every stop to ensure participants survive. Your father would receive excellent care, better than what we can provide here. But you'd be trusting his life to a company with a questionable track record. And if I say no to the trial? If I can't afford the surgery here? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. We both knew what happened then. I need to make a call, I said. Dr. Patterson nodded and stood. You have 3 hours. After that, it might be too late to transfer him even if he's accepted into the trial. I'm sorry, Emma. I wish I had better options to give you. She left, and I sat there in the sterile quiet, my father's life hanging by a thread, and 3 hours to make a decision that would determine whether he lived or died, and what that life might cost us both. I pulled out my phone to call the trial coordinator. What I didn't know was that the real cost would be far worse than money. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. The woman who answered the Corvus Biomedical trial hotline had a voice like honey over broken glass. Smooth, professional, with something sharp underneath. Corvus Cardiac Innovation Program. This is Dr. Melissa Walsh speaking. How may I help you? I explained the situation in a rush. My father's condition, the DNR, the impossible choice. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a pause that lasted just long enough to make me nervous. I'm sorry to hear about your father's situation, she said, and it almost sounded genuine. However, I need to be transparent with you. Our trial has very specific acceptance criteria. Not every candidate qualifies, and the screening process typically takes several days. My heart sank. I don't have several days. I have hours. I understand. Let me pull up our emergency protocol screening. I heard typing on the other end. Can you provide me with your father's full medical history? I'll need details about both heart attacks, current cardiac function, and any other relevant health conditions. I rattled off everything I knew, referencing the charts at the foot of Dad's bed when I wasn't sure about specifics. Dr. Walsh asked pointed questions about his kidney function, his lung capacity, whether he had diabetes or liver disease. Each question felt like a test I might fail. Finally, she said, "Hold on one moment, please." The hold music was classical piano, incongruously peaceful. I stared at my father's face while I waited, watching the ventilator breathe for him, watching the cardiac monitor track his weakening heartbeat. Dr. Walsh came back on the line. Ms. Rodriguez, your father is an excellent candidate for our trial. His age, his cardiac damage profile, and the acute nature of his current crisis all fall within our parameters. More importantly, his case represents exactly the kind of intervention our device is designed to address. Relief flooded through me. So he's accepted? Provisionally, yes. But I need to be very clear about what you're agreeing to. Her voice shifted, becoming more businesslike. This is a Phase 2 clinical trial, which means we've completed initial safety testing, but we're still gathering efficacy data. The device your father would receive is called the Prometheus Cardiac Assist System. It's a temporary support mechanism that we can install through a minimally invasive procedure, much less traumatic than traditional LVAD surgery. What's the success rate? In Phase 1 trials, we had an 87% survival rate at 6 months. But those were carefully selected candidates under controlled conditions. Your father's case is more acute. I'd estimate his chances at 60 to 70%, though that's still better than his current trajectory. 60 to 70%. Not the 78% Dr. Yen had quoted for the LVAD surgery. But it was free, and free was the only option I had. What do I need to do? First, you'll need to sign consent forms. I'm sending them to your email now. Read them carefully, they're extensive. Second, we'll need to arrange immediate medical transport. We have an air ambulance that can be at Grace Community Hospital within 2 hours. Third, and this is important, you'll need to understand the terms of his participation. Terms. Your father will be transferred to our primary research facility in Colorado Springs. He'll remain there for the duration of the trial, which could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on his recovery. During the initial phases, he'll be in an isolated medical environment. For the first 30 days, no visitors are permitted. This is to minimize infection risk and ensure proper monitoring. 30 days without seeing him. 30 days of wondering if he was alive, if he was suffering, if I'd made the right choice. You'll receive weekly updates from his medical team, Dr. Walsh continued. And after the initial phase, if his condition stabilizes, You'll be able to visit under supervised conditions. All expenses, transportation, procedure, monitoring, medication, are covered by Corvus. You won't pay a single dollar. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? I asked. Dr. Walsh laughed softly. You're smart to ask. The catch is that once your father enters the trial, he's committed. If he decides he wants to withdraw, if his condition changes and he wants to pursue other treatments, he can't leave until the trial period ends or until he's medically cleared. This protects the integrity of our data. So he'd be trapped there. He'd be receiving cutting-edge care in a state-of-the-art facility, she corrected. But yes, essentially, he would be contractually obligated to complete the trial. However, if at any point the medical team determines that the device isn't working or that his life is in imminent danger, he can be released. We're not monsters, Ms. Rodriguez. We want your father to survive. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. There's one more thing, Dr. Walsh said, and I braced myself. As part of the trial agreement, you'll need to sign an NDA. You cannot discuss your father's participation with media, on social media, or with anyone outside immediate family. This is standard practice in clinical trials. We can't have preliminary results being shared before we've completed our analysis. An NDA? That felt wrong somehow, like they were trying to hide something. It's purely to protect the scientific process, she assured me. If word got out that we were testing this device before we've published our findings, it could compromise everything. Surely you can understand that. I could. Or at least I could convince myself I could. How quickly do you need my answer? The consent forms take approximately 15 minutes to read through. I'll need them signed and returned within an hour if we're going to arrange transport in time. Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to understand, your father is dying. Without intervention, he has hours. This trial is his best chance. Possibly his only chance. She was right. I knew she was right. Send the forms, I said. They're already in your inbox. I'll wait on the line while you review them. I pulled up my email on my phone. The message from Corvus contained 3 PDF attachments: patient consent form, family agreement and terms, and confidentiality agreement. Each was over 30 pages long. I can't read all of this in an hour, I said. I understand. If you'd like, I can summarize the key points for you. But Ms. Rodriguez, I need to stress this. Every minute we spend on this call is a minute your father's heart is failing further. Time is not on our side. She was pushing. I recognized the sales tactic: create urgency, remove the ability to think clearly. But she also wasn't wrong. I could see Dad's blood pressure numbers on the monitor, watch them drop slowly but steadily. I scrolled through the documents, trying to catch key phrases. Legal terms jumped out at me. Assumption of risk, experimental procedures, no guarantee of success, waiver of liability. And then I saw it, buried in paragraph 47 of the patient consent form. Participant acknowledges that the Prometheus cardiac assist system is an investigational device, and that unforeseen complications may arise. In the event of device malfunction, adverse reaction, or medical deterioration, Corvus Biomedical will provide all necessary care, but cannot be held liable for outcomes including permanent disability or death. They were covering themselves legally. If Dad died during the trial, I couldn't sue them. If the device failed and left him worse than before, I had no recourse. But what was the alternative? Let him die here, in debt, knowing I'd done nothing to try to save him? At 7:52 a.m., I signed the forms. Dr. Walsh's voice brightened immediately. Excellent. The air ambulance is already en route. They should arrive at Grace Community within 90 minutes. Please inform your father's medical team of the transfer. Dr. Patterson has my contact information if she needs to discuss handoff protocols. What do I tell my dad? When he wakes up, there was a pause. Tell him he's receiving treatment that will save his life. Tell him you love him. Tell him to trust the process. Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Rodriguez, your father is very fortunate to have a daughter who loves him enough to make difficult choices. What you're doing is brave. It didn't feel brave. It felt like I was feeding my father to something dark and hungry and hoping it would spit him back out alive. After I hung up, I sat with Dad for another hour. Dr. Patterson came in at 8:30 to confirm the transfer arrangements. She looked troubled. Emma, are you sure about this? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. But I understand why you're making this one. She checked Dad's monitors, adjusted his 4-drip. I want you to promise me something. If anything feels wrong, if you don't hear from them regularly, if something about this situation doesn't sit right with you, promise me you'll fight to get him back. Why? What do you know about Corvus? Nothing concrete. Just rumors. Stories from other doctors about trials that went sideways, about data that didn't quite add up. Nothing I can prove. But trust your instincts, Emma. If they start telling you things that don't make sense, don't just accept them. The air ambulance arrived at 9:47 a.m. I watched through the window as the medical team transferred Dad's unconscious body onto their gurney, disconnecting him from Grace Community's machines and connecting him to their portable ones. They moved with practiced efficiency, these people who transported human lives like cargo. The pilot, a woman with short gray hair, came over to me. We'll take good care of him. Flight time to Colorado Springs is about 3 hours. He'll be in surgery within 2 hours of landing. Can I fly with you? She shook her head. Against protocol. Family flies commercial. But don't worry, we're better equipped than any ICU. He's in the safest hands possible right now. They wheeled Dad out, and I followed as far as the hospital's helipad. The helicopter was white with the Corvus logo, a black crow, painted on the side. Something about that logo made me uneasy, but I couldn't articulate why. The last thing I saw before they loaded Dad into the helicopter was his face, still peaceful in unconsciousness, unaware that I'd just signed his life over to strangers. The helicopter lifted off at 10:03 a.m., and I watched it until it was a speck in the sky. I booked a flight to Colorado Springs for that evening. I'd arrive around 10 p.m., too late to see Dad, but early enough to be there first thing in the morning. At 2:17 p.m., while I was in an Uber heading to the airport, I received an email from Dr. Walsh. Your father has arrived safely at our facility and is being prepped for surgery. The procedure is scheduled to begin at 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll send an update once he's out of surgery. Thank you again for entrusting us with his care. At 7:45 p.m., sitting in the airport terminal waiting for my boarding call, I received a second email. Surgery completed successfully. Device installed without complications. Your father is in recovery. His vital signs are stable. I'll have a more detailed update for you tomorrow morning. The relief was overwhelming. I actually sobbed in the middle of the airport, drawing concerned looks from other travelers. He was alive. The surgery worked. We'd beaten the odds. I was still feeling that relief when I landed in Colorado Springs at 10:23 p.m. I was feeling it when I checked into a cheap motel 3 miles from the Corvus facility. I was feeling it when I finally fell asleep at midnight, exhausted and emotionally drained but hopeful. The relief lasted until 6:47 a.m. the next morning, when I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Dr. Catherine Bennett from Corvus Biomedical. I need you to come to the facility immediately. There's been a complication with your father. My blood turned to ice. What kind of complication? We can't discuss it over the phone. How quickly can you get here? I was already pulling on my clothes, my hands shaking. 20 minutes. Come to the main entrance. Security will escort you. Ms. Rodriguez. She hesitated. Please hurry. She hung up. I drove to the Corvus facility in a blind panic, running 2 red lights and exceeding the speed limit by 20 miles per hour. The building was a sleek modern structure of glass and steel, looking more like a tech company headquarters than a medical facility. Security was waiting for me at the entrance. 2 men in black uniforms who checked my ID and handed me a visitor badge. They led me through a maze of white hallways, their faces carefully neutral. We stopped outside a conference room. Through the window, I could see Dr. Walsh and another woman I assumed was Dr. Bennett, along with 3 other people in lab coats. The door opened. Dr. Bennett gestured for me to enter. I walked in and immediately knew something was very, very wrong. Everyone's face was grave. Dr. Walsh wouldn't meet my eyes. Please sit down, Dr. Bennett said. Where's my father? Ms. Rodriguez, please sit down. I sat. My legs wouldn't have held me up much longer anyway. Dr. Bennett took the chair across from me. Your father's surgery went exactly as planned. The Prometheus device was installed successfully, and his heart responded well initially. However, approximately 4 hours ago, we detected an irregularity in his neural responses. What does that mean? She pulled out a tablet and showed me brain scans, images that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant something terrible to her. During the cardiac arrest your father experienced before coming to us, his brain was deprived of oxygen longer than the initial reports indicated. The damage was more extensive than we realized. The stress of surgery and anesthesia triggered something we didn't anticipate. My mouth was dry. Triggered what? Dr. Bennett looked at Dr. Walsh, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then she looked back at me. Ms. Rodriguez, your father is awake. The surgery was successful. His heart is functioning properly with the device. But, she trailed off. I wanted to scream at her to just say it, to stop drawing it out. He doesn't remember who he is, she finally said. He doesn't remember his life, his family, or anything about his past. The oxygen deprivation caused severe retrograde amnesia, and based on our preliminary assessments, it may be permanent. The room seemed to tilt. You're saying my father has no memory? No long-term memory, correct. He can form new short-term memories. He remembers the nurses who've treated him this morning. He remembers being told he had surgery. But everything before he woke up here? It's gone. Can I see him? That's why we called you. We need to assess his reaction to familiar faces. It's possible that seeing you might trigger something. But Ms. Rodriguez, you need to prepare yourself. When you walk into that room, your father won't recognize you. He won't know who Emma is. He won't remember your mother, your childhood, any of it. I couldn't process this. My father had survived the surgery. He was alive. And yet somehow, the man I'd fought so hard to save no longer existed. There's one more thing, Dr. Walsh said quietly. Because of the amnesia, your father doesn't remember signing the DNR order. He doesn't remember making the decision to forego expensive medical treatment. When we explained his situation to him this morning, he asked us to do everything possible to help him recover, regardless of cost. The irony was so brutal it felt like a physical blow. My father had signed a DNR to save money. I'd put him in an experimental trial to save money. And now he didn't remember any of that. Didn't remember the financial nightmare that had driven every decision we'd made. Take me to him, I said. They led me down another hallway, stopping outside a private room. Through the window, I could see my father sitting up in bed, staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. Dr. Bennett put her hand on my shoulder. Remember, he doesn't know you. Don't push too hard. We don't know how his brain will process this. I pushed open the door and walked in. Dad looked up at me, his expression politely curious. Waiting to see who this stranger was who'd entered his room. Hi, I said, my voice breaking. My name is Emma. I'm your daughter. He stared at me, studying my face, searching for something that wasn't there. Then he smiled, a friendly, distant smile. It's nice to meet you, my father said. I'm sorry, but I don't remember you. And somehow, that was worse than if he'd died. I spent 3 hours with my father that first day, and every minute felt like drowning. He was polite, engaged, even friendly in a detached sort of way. He asked questions about himself. What was his job? Where did he live? Did he have hobbies? With the curiosity of someone learning about a stranger. When I told him about Mom, about how they'd met at a coffee shop in 1987 and married 6 months later because they couldn't imagine waiting any longer, he listened with interest and no recognition whatsoever. She sounds like she was a wonderful person, he said. I'm sorry I don't remember her. The casual way he said it, like he was expressing sympathy for someone else's loss, broke something inside me. Dr. Bennett observed our interaction from a chair in the corner, taking notes. Afterward, she pulled me into the hallway. His response is what we expected, she said. The amnesia is comprehensive. However, there are some positive signs. His cognitive function is intact. He can reason, problem-solve, form new memories. He's essentially the same person intellectually, just without his past. Is there any chance he'll recover his memories? Honestly, it's unlikely. This type of damage is usually permanent. But the brain is remarkable at adaptation. He'll create a new life, new memories. It won't be the same as what he lost, but it will be something. He doesn't know me, I said, and I couldn't keep the devastation out of my voice. I'm a stranger to him. For now, yes. But that can change. You can build a new relationship. It won't be the same as the one you had, but it can be meaningful in its own way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I didn't want a new relationship with my father. I wanted the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, and had cried at my high school graduation, and had held my hand at Mom's funeral. I wanted my actual father, not this friendly stranger who happened to inhabit his body. But screaming wouldn't change anything, so I just nodded. Over the next 2 weeks, I visited Dad every day. The trial protocol allowed it, since he was out of the critical post-surgery period. Each visit followed the same pattern. I'd arrive, he'd greet me with polite warmth, and we'd talk about his progress. He never remembered our previous conversations, unless I referenced something from earlier that same day. I showed him photos, videos, told him stories about our life together. None of it sparked anything. He'd look at pictures of himself at my college graduation and say, "I look happy there," like he was commenting on a photograph of someone else. The Corvus medical team was thrilled. Dad's physical recovery was extraordinary. The Prometheus device was working perfectly. His heart function had improved to 40% capacity, better than it had been in years. He was walking, eating solid foods, and showed no signs of rejecting the device. He was, from a medical standpoint, a complete success. From every other standpoint, he was lost. On day 17 of his recovery, Dr. Walsh called me into her office. She sat behind a sleek modern desk, her expression professionally sympathetic. "Emma, your father is ready to be discharged. Physically, he's stable enough to leave the facility. However, we have a complication we need to discuss." "What complication?" "The trial protocol requires participants to remain in our care for 3 to 6 months for monitoring. Your father still has 11 weeks left in that period. However, given his amnesia and cognitive situation, we're facing an ethical question." "What question?" Dr. Walsh folded her hands on her desk. "Your father doesn't remember agreeing to this trial. He has no memory of signing consent forms or understanding the terms. Legally, his consent is still valid. You signed as his medical proxy. But ethically, we're in murky territory. He's essentially being held here under an agreement he doesn't remember making. Can he leave? That's what I need to discuss with you. Under normal circumstances, no, the contract is binding. But there's a clause for exceptional cases. If a participant's cognitive status changes so drastically that they can no longer provide informed consent for ongoing participation, we can release them early." Hope flared in my chest. "So he can come home?" "He can. But there are conditions. First, he'll need ongoing monitoring. The device requires regular checkups, medication management, and immediate medical attention if anything goes wrong. We can set him up with a local cardiologist, but you'll be responsible for ensuring he attends all appointments." "That's fine. I can handle that." Second, the device itself remains property of Corvus until the trial concludes. If he leaves early, he's required to return every 2 weeks for evaluation. Those visits would be here, in Colorado Springs. You'd need to arrange transportation and accommodation. My hope dimmed slightly. "How much would that cost?" "We can cover the medical evaluations. But transportation and lodging would be your responsibility. We estimate approximately $3,000 per visit, $6,000 per month, for at least 11 more weeks. Over $20,000 total. There's a third condition," Dr. Walsh continued. "The NDA remains in effect. He cannot discuss his participation, the device, or his treatment with anyone outside immediate family. If he violates that agreement, we can recall the device immediately, and he would need to pay the full cost of its installation and removal, approximately $400,000. The trap closed around me. He could leave, but we'd be tethered to Corvus financially and legally for months. And if he couldn't remember the agreement, how could he be expected to follow it? What happens if we refuse? If we just take him home and don't come back?" Dr. Walsh's expression hardened slightly. "Then you'd be in breach of contract. Corvus would pursue legal action to recover the device and the full cost of all medical treatment provided. We're talking about a lawsuit that would bankrupt you. I don't think you want that." "No, I didn't want that. But I also didn't want my father trapped in a medical facility, building a new life with strangers because he couldn't remember the one he'd had. Can I talk to him about this?" "Of course. But Emma, understand something, he's happy here. He doesn't remember his old life, so he doesn't miss it. The staff likes him. He's made friends with other patients. To him, this facility is the only world he knows. Are you sure taking him back to a place he doesn't remember is what's best for him?" The question haunted me as I walked to Dad's room. I found him in the common area, playing chess with another patient. He was laughing at something the other man said, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Maybe Dr. Walsh was right. Maybe he was better off here, unburdened by memories of financial stress and loss and grief. But he was my father, and I wanted him home. "Dad!" The words still felt strange, addressing someone who didn't recognize his relationship to me. "Can we talk?" He excused himself from the chess game and followed me to a quiet corner. I explained the situation, the option to leave early, the conditions, the costs. He listened carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. "This device in my chest, I need it to stay alive." "Yes. And if I leave, we'd need to pay thousands of dollars to come back for checkups? Yes. Do we have that kind of money? The question was so innocently asked, so completely unaware of the financial nightmare that had driven us to this point. I wanted to lie. Wanted to tell him yes, we were fine, money was no issue. But I couldn't. No, I said. We don't. We're basically broke. The only reason you're here is because the trial was free. He processed this information with the logical detachment of someone hearing about a stranger's problems. Then it sounds like staying here makes the most sense financially. But you'd be away from home. From your life. Emma, he said gently. I don't remember my life. I don't remember home. This place is as familiar to me as anywhere else would be. Maybe more familiar, since I've actually built memories here. He paused. Unless you need me home? Are you okay financially without me? The question should have been absurd. What parent asks their child if they're needed? But he genuinely didn't know his role in my life, didn't understand that I needed him for reasons that had nothing to do with finances. I need you, I said quietly. I need my dad. His expression softened with something like pity. I wish I could be the father you remember. But I can't. That person is gone. I'm just me now. And I think me staying here where I'm taken care of and you don't have to worry about money might be the kindest thing I can do for you. He was choosing to stay. My father, who didn't remember signing a DNR to save money, was now choosing to stay in a medical facility to save money. The irony was too perfect and too painful. I left the facility that evening and drove aimlessly through Colorado Springs, trying to process what had happened. My phone rang at 8:47 p.m. An unknown number, but I answered anyway. Emma Rodriguez? The voice was male, older, with a slight southern accent. Yes. My name is Richard Morrison. I'm an investigative journalist with the Denver Gazette. I'm working on a story about Corvus Biomedical, and I understand your father is a participant in their cardiac trial. My blood ran cold. I can't talk to you. There's an NDA. I know about the NDA. I also know about 3 other participants in that same trial. Emma, 2 of them are dead. The world seemed to stop. What? 2 participants in the Prometheus cardiac trial died in the last 4 months. Corvus hasn't disclosed this information publicly because the deaths occurred outside the trial period. Both patients had left the facility and were home when they died. But I've obtained medical records suggesting the device may have malfunctioned in both cases. Why are you telling me this? Because your father is still there. Still under their care. And I think there's something Corvus isn't telling participants about this device. Emma, I need to know what's happening inside that facility. I need someone willing to talk. I could lose everything. They could sue me. They could. But if this device is dangerous and they're covering it up, how many more people die before someone speaks up? Your father is vulnerable right now, unable to advocate for himself. You might be the only person who can protect him. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking too badly to drive. What do you want from me? Information. Observations. Anything unusual you've noticed about his treatment or the facility's operations. And most importantly, I need you to convince your father to leave that place before something happens to him. He doesn't want to leave. Then make him understand why he should. Emma, I've been investigating Corvus for 8 months. This isn't just about a faulty medical device. There's something bigger happening there, something they're going very far to keep quiet. Please, help me help your father. He gave me his contact information and hung up before I could respond. I sat in my car on the side of the road, watching traffic pass, and realized I'd reached a decision point. I could stay silent, honor the NDA, and trust that Corvus had my father's best interests at heart. Or I could risk everything. The device, the treatment, potential bankruptcy from a lawsuit, to pursue the possibility that something was very wrong. My father had signed a DNR to save money. I'd signed away his autonomy to save money. Every choice we'd made had been driven by financial desperation. But 2 people were dead. And if Richard Morrison was right, my father could be next. I started the car and drove back to the cheap motel. I had 11 weeks to figure out what Corvus Biomedical was really doing with my father. 11 weeks to decide if I was brave enough to fight back. And somewhere in that sterile facility my father, who didn't remember who he was or who I was, slept peacefully, his life sustained by a device I was beginning to suspect might kill him. The DNR order he'd signed to save money sat in a box in my motel room, a bitter reminder that sometimes the cost of survival is more than anyone should have to pay. But the real cost was still coming. And it would be far worse than money.